Generating traffic and sales can be a challenge for online merchants. But selling on the Walmart Marketplace puts your products in front of millions of customers who shop on Walmart.com. And right now, sellers who join Walmart Marketplace can save up to 50% on referral and fulfillment fees for the first 90 days. So get started today. Head over to marketplace.walmart.com/savings. That's marketplace.walmart.com/savings.
Welcome to E-Commerce Conversations, a weekly podcast focusing on e-commerce topics featuring interviews with prominent people in the e-commerce space.
This is Merchant Talk by Practical E-Commerce. I'm Kerry Murdock. Etsy.com was launched in 2005 as an online marketplace for handmade items and vintage goods. It has since grown to include hundreds of thousands of sellers and many more buyers. It reportedly facilitated over 180 million in annual transactions in 2009. Many of Etsy's sellers are part-time craftspeople, and one of those is Arkansas-based Laurie Marshall. She's been selling hand-sewn crafts and vintage items on Etsy since 2007. Her two sites there are pumpkinhead.etsy.com and girlchild.etsy.com. She's with us now. Well, Laurie, thank you for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. Laurie, describe Etsy to our audience. What is Etsy?
Etsy is a marketplace that is intended for people who make their own goods. There is also a market there for vintage items, which they consider to be 20 years or older. But the primary focus of Etsy is for people who are artists, artisans, crafters, who many of whom have businesses and have had for quite a while, selling their own goods. But many of them are people who have a hobby and who wanted a place to sell their wares, and so they've gathered them all up on Etsy.
And those are handmade items.
Yes, the people who say they have art, crafts, it all has to be handmade by that person who's selling.
Did I notice some vintage, like old records or something on there?
Yes, I have a shop that is a vintage shop. I have one that's handmade and one that's vintage items. And I do have some old records and some glassware, and you can also sell supplies. And so I have some vintage supplies and things like that for sewing reasons, sewing ephemera, I guess.
Yeah. So when did you first start selling on Etsy?
I started in January of 2007, and that was after somebody that I gave some things to at Christmas that were handmade said, "Have you ever heard of this place called Etsy?" And I'd never heard of it, so I started looking into it and decided I might as well open up a shop.
Yeah. Have you tried other marketplaces? Like, have you tried eBay, for example?
No, I haven't. I had thought about eBay, but it seemed more difficult. I don't know that it is. It seemed more difficult when I looked into signing up there to sell. And Etsy just was real streamlined. You sign up for free, and there were no fees. There's a 20-cent per item listing fee, and so to me that was very simple. And I don't know if it was just because the site, eBay itself, is kind of overwhelming. There's so much there. Maybe that just put me off, but I've never tried eBay.
So you mentioned fees there. It's 20 cents per item to list, and then did I read somewhere it's a 3% transaction fee that Etsy collects?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. I know you have two separate stores there. It's kind of interesting. If you sell on Etsy, you have your own domain name, a dedicated domain name that's actually a subdomain off Etsy. And you have two stores. Could you tell us what the stores are and what you sell? You alluded to those a minute ago. Yeah.
The first one is Punkinhead, Punkin Head, punkinhead.etsy.com, and that one is where I started, and that is all my things that I make by hand, primarily sewn things. I mess around on a sewing machine, and I sew a pretty decent straight line, so anything I can make by doing that, I put it up on there. So I have tote bags and some home decor items, and just it's kind of a place for me to unleash my habit of picking up vintage materials and making things with them, and now I have an excuse. And the other one is Girl Child, and that one is where I put vintage items, and it's kind of the same thing. I love to go thrifting, and I love to hang around at auctions and tag sales, and so I find things that I love, but I don't necessarily have for them, and if I find something at a really good price, then I put it up on Etsy and turn it around for somebody else who loves it.
And that's girlchild.etsy.com was the second one.
Yes.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. So have you ever considered launching your own, website, say girlchild.com with a shopping cart and everything, or are you happy with what you're doing there at Etsy?
I'm pretty happy at Etsy. I do have a husband who is savvy with setting up websites, so I have talked to him a little bit about coming up with some kind of domain for myself that I could use as a place to house my blog and also put my items, and I haven't looked into it enough to know what it would take to do the shopping cart and all the other stuff. So, and I actually, although I have a business and have a tax ID number, it's not something that I've been serious enough about to actually find out what it would take to have a business license here in my city and things like that. So I haven't quite gotten to that level yet of sales, and so I haven't had to mess with it, but it's something I'm considering and looking into for the future on my free time.
Yeah. How much time would you say you spend? Would this be a full-time job for you, what you do with Etsy?
Oh, no, unfortunately. I have a job where I work as a fundraiser 30 hours a week, and then spend most of my free time in the summer and fall is spent on sewing, and that's because I do Etsy and I'm at a farmer's market here locally, and my sister and I, she is also on Etsy, we do several craft fairs during the summer and fall. So that most of my free time during those times are spent trying to keep my inventory up. But right now it's a really nice slow time. I haven't been to the craft rooms for a few weeks.
Okay. How's the payment handled in Etsy? So if I go to one of your stores and buy one of your vintage items, how would I get the money to you?
I think perhaps all of the people who've bought from me so far have paid through PayPal. And so there's a fee associated with that, of course, but it's not very much. And I price my items so that I have a decent profit margin, so I'm not too... it doesn't bother me that I lose $1 or something here or there. And there is also, you can choose on Etsy to take personal checks or money orders.
Can you take credit cards if you had a merchant account?
I'm trying to remember if that is on Etsy. I know that you can use them through PayPal. I don't think that you can I think it's just PayPal, personal checks and money orders. And then the shop owner can decide which they prefer. Yeah. And so most people who take checks or money orders, say that I won't ship your item until I receive your payment or your check is cleared or, whatever. But primarily, most of the people I think that are shopping on there use PayPal. I think their demographic is skewed pretty young, so most of the folks online have a PayPal account.
That makes sense. What about shipping? How do you ship your products?
I use the postal service. I know there have been a lot of things in the forums on Etsy. I see a lot of people who prefer to use something with insurance, and I think it really is based on whether or not you are producing items that are fairly higher value. Like my tote bags, I think the highest price thing I have in my shop on Punkinhead is $40, and If I were making jewelry and I were selling a ring that was worth $275, then I'd probably use FedEx or someplace where I could insure it a little more easily and track it and things. And I just don't have to mess with that so far.
Yeah. Have you ever sold an item to a customer who became disgruntled and you had a dispute?
No, I have not had that happen. So I've been very fortunate. I actually lost a pair of earrings once. It was a pair of vintage earrings, and someone in Belgium bought them, and I could not find them for the life of me.
Oh, no.
Because I put them away in a drawer or something in my crafty room. And so she was the only one that I've ever had to say something was wrong, and she was very understanding. And so I've since found them and I'm going to be putting them in the mail to her. But we just canceled the sale. But no, I haven't had anybody complain. So far everything's gone well.
Oh, that's interesting. How many items would you say you sell on Etsy a month?
I don't do a lot of sales. I know a lot of people do a lot more than I do. I think on my vintage site on Girl Child, I would average 1 to 2 a month. Mm-hmm. And on Pumpkinhead, I actually only sell one every 6 or 8 weeks, mm-hmm. which it's interesting to me. I sell a lot more at craft fairs, and I think maybe my items, because of their vintage fabric nature, or maybe my photos aren't as good as some, I don't know, but I think a lot of people like to handle them, and once they see them in person and handle them a little, they like them more than just seeing them in a picture.
You mentioned photos. Can you display more than one photo of your products?
Mm-hmm. On Etsy, they have 5. You can put 5 up, and it is, I think, sales and especially getting listed in the gift guides and in the treasuries are extremely visually focused. If you have a good photo, if your item is not anything special, you can probably sell it for more than somebody might buy it for at a thrift store or something, just because it looks so good. And on the forums, you'll find that everybody says the first thing to do, people will get on the forum and say, what do I need to do? What do I need to focus on? I'm a new seller. And everybody says, get good photos. Mm. Make sure you're taking good photos, because especially since, of course, you're not in person, it's what's selling your item. So you've got to get the details, and you've got to make it look nice, and the people who have the shops that get the most attention are the ones that have really nice pictures of their items.
You mentioned forums. Forums on Etsy?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Yep, they have forums for sellers and buyers are on there. So, and they're fairly, I would say that they're pretty diverse. There are several different sections that Etsy puts together, like there's shop critiques and there's business topics. There are 5 or 6 different topics, and then you can post your postings under that, and it's full of really good information. Our
listeners and our readers are mainly e-commerce merchants, as we've mentioned earlier, that have their own website. Some of them have brick and mortar stores, and they're businesses with employees. Have you ever seen any of those type of merchants cross-sell on Etsy, use Etsy and put up lots of inventory, or is that disallowed?
Well, because of the handmade nature, mm-hmm. there are not a lot of people like that. Now, you will see, they have interviews with folks who are selling on Etsy. Like, they'll have written interviews in their different areas on Etsy. Mm-hmm. And some of them do have, it's their full-time business. And mm-hmm. so they will have either maybe other marketplaces such as their own website where they'll sell, mm-hmm. or they may sell in a shop, and I know some artists, they may have their items in different brick and mortar shops, but not necessarily a shop that they own.
Makes sense.
But I know that if it's something that is not handmade by that artist, then that's supposed to be disallowed. Yeah, you're not supposed to be able to sell that on Etsy.
Could you tell our listeners, what do you like and dislike most about Etsy?
I think one of my favorite things about Etsy is just the community of it. As in any website that's as large as Etsy is, you're going to come across people who maybe don't see things the same way you do. So in the forums, every now and then there's a thread that, people get onto just because it's really getting catty. So
sure.
There is that. But for the most part, there's an understanding amongst people who are selling, especially the handmade folks, that we are all people who love to make things, and we are all people who are visual and who are artistic, and there's a sense of community there. And I've met people from all over the country because of my Etsy stuff that I enjoy following their blogs, and I enjoy chatting with them on Twitter, and they're a source of information for me. So it's always a help to a business if you can, hang out with people who are doing the same thing you are.
Anything about the site that you're not happy with, or?
I think the only thing that would be probably something that irritates me is the attention that is paid to certain sellers and not as much attention paid to other sellers. And I'm talking in terms of putting people in the gift guides and featuring them on the site and stuff. But when I say that, I understand completely that the people who are featured are the ones that are top sellers. They're the ones who have branded themselves very clearly, and they are a success story, and they manage their business well, and so for them to get featured is understandable. Mm-hmm. But when it's the holiday time and I have a holiday item that I'd love to have featured in the gift guides that never gets put up, it's frustrating. And then to see that other shops maybe have several things in the gift guides, that it just seems like, well, you could spread the love a little bit.
Does an Etsy seller have to pay to be in the gift guides?
No, they have features that you can buy. They're like little advertisements that you can purchase, and I think it's $7. Like in the gift guides, you could buy a little advertisement for your item to go in a particular gift guide, and it's not part of that guide, but it's on the side. But I've seen several forum threads, and actually my sister has purchased a couple, and the resounding consensus is that they don't really pay. So even $7, if you're going to stick something in there that costs $12 and then you never get anything out of it, then it's not worth putting it up. So I haven't done anything like that.
Any other thoughts for our listeners, Laurie, in our last minute or two?
As far as Etsy is concerned, I think that I know it's a growing site. I know this year at the fairs that my sister and I attended, and at the farmers market, we had more people this year than last year at the same time saying, oh, yeah, I know about Etsy. They'll see our business card and say, oh, you're on Etsy. Last year, people were like, what is this? So it's certainly something that's growing, and I think it's easy to use, and I'm looking forward to growing my business enough that I can start branching out and putting stuff in some boutiques, and hopefully this will be a good start.
Laurie's sites, just to repeat these again, the first is pumpkinhead.etsy.com. Laurie's second site is girlchild.etsy.com. And Laurie Marshall, an Etsy seller in the state of Arkansas. We want to thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's all the time we have for this week's e-commerce conversation. I hope you enjoyed it. Please tune in next week for another new episode.